finish. Thank you very much. That's a real pleasure. I was trying to remember the last time I was here, and it must have been in the early 70s when Ray Brown, the great bass player, and Louie Bellson on guitar, and Pete Jolly and I came to be a part of some of the improv classes that you have here. And that was really a joy, because Lyle Mays was still here, Steve Houghton, and I think Herbie Stewart, because right after that year, all three of those young gentlemen joined Woody Herman's band. But it's always a joy to be here, because I know you have such a wonderful program here, and it's very much of an honor for you to ask me to come and talk about this instrument. What I'd like to do today, I've been doing quite a few of these clinics. I've been doing them for about 45 years. I'm only 19 and a half years old, but I've been doing it for about 45 years. I always enjoy coming to play, but I always like to leave knowing that we've covered something about this instrument, not just displaying my technique, but also being able to dig in and know a little bit about what this instrument is all about. You have a great advantage here. I've always said that there are two clinicians in the world today that I think are the greatest, and you got one here, and that's Ed Soap. And the other one is Alan Dawson. I think both those guys not only play great, but they can back it up by teaching. And I think that's one of the most important things when it comes to being a clinician. Being a clinician is not an easy job, because you have to be able to back up what you're saying. You have to be abreast of all the things that are happening, and I'm one of those guys. I like to keep my eyes and ears open for all new music that's going on, and being aware of what Billy Calvin is doing, what Steve Gadd is doing, what Neil Peart is doing, what Elvin Jones is doing, because all these players are really doing it. What I'd like to do is start playing, and then I want to demonstrate some basic fundamentals which you really can't get away from when it comes to drumming. We always have to fall back to where we started in some of the early scales, because Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker taught us that. You know, they just didn't get up on a bandstand and learn how to play all those great things. They really did their homework. I mean, they learned their scales. Then there's you can't avoid the question and answer thing. I don't know all the answers. I don't think anybody does, but you may have some questions that you want to ask, and I think that question and answer period is always good. Then I'll wind up by playing. So I think we got about an hour and a half, 2 hours, or something like that. Really? Because if you let me go, I'll be here till midnight. So I'll start off by doing a little playing first. This first thing I'm going to play will be in the key of A flat. that played there, I call that secondary. You know, it's all nice to have a lot of technique and you do this and so forth, but I think the main thing about this instrument is to be able to kick the band. I don't care whether you're playing in a rock band, a fusion band, a country and western band, swing band. When you can take care of business, of playing in the rhythm section, and really make the band cook, that's important. The solos, I always say, are secondary. I'd rather have a guy in a band that can really get in there and get a groove going, rather than have a guy that has a lot of technique, and that's all he can do is play drum solos. And you notice I always refer to the drum set as an instrument, because when I was 18 or 19 years old, they used to refer to our band as 17 guys and a drummer. And I used to say, wait a minute, what do you mean? I'm part of the band. Why don't you say 18 guys? Well, no, you guys are the noise makers. I said, no, we aren't noise makers. We are sound makers. And of course, today, all the players are sound players, sound makers. And rightfully so, because we are an integral part of the band or orchestra, and we should be treated as such, and we are. So in order to play this instrument correctly, it takes a touch, just like a piano player or anybody, you know. And I've always felt that my drum set is a choir. Soprano, alto, tenor, bass, multitude of high and low sounds. And if you treat the drum set as an orchestra and a choir, then I think you'll learn how to play a little more musical, because that's where it really is. And also, I really advocate players playing with other instrument players. I know for years I would practice down my dad's music store, sometime during the summertime, 12 hours a day. That was fine, but the main thing was, after I had that together, how do I use that? How do I distribute that to the drum set and on the stage playing with other players? That's the key. So it wasn't until I got to be about 13 or 14 I had a chance to sit in and play with guys that were a lot older than myself, and I learned what time was all about. So I always tell young players, or anybody, that when you get a chance to play in a bandstand with other instrument players, that's the key to it. Because you can practice by yourself for hours, that's fine, that's part of it, that's only one part of it. But when you actually get in a bandstand and play with other players, then you learn how to use this instrument, this instrument, this instrument, this instrument, this instrument, and that's when you become musical. So that's very, very important. And you have that advantage here by having 11 swing bands and all kinds of groups here, improv groups, woodwind ensembles and so forth. And you have percussion ensembles here too, right, Bob? See, we never had that. When I went to high school, we had a marching band and a concert band. And we played Poet Bethesda until it came out of our ears. That's all we had. I mean, really. Now you've got all kinds of material. You've got material for percussion ensembles, and we didn't have that, you know. So you got it all at your fingertips. All you got to do is just grab a hold of it and do it. The reason I got a couple of snare drums up here is I constantly have guys ask me, what kind of technique do you use? I see you using this finger and so forth, and I feel it's only right that I let you in on a little bit of what I do. Now, I've explained this many times, that there are many ways of holding the drumstick. We all know, all you people out there are seasoned players. You're familiar with match grip and conventional grip. I always, a lot of younger students at other colleges that aren't really as hip as you are here, they say, how come this came about? Well, we all know that when the drummer had the sling over the shoulder years ago, there was no snare drum stand. You had to assume this position because of the angle of the drum. But there are various ways of doing this, and one of the techniques I learned was from Murray Spivak. By the way, Murray Spivak is probably one of the finest teachers that I ever had. He's in a class with Billy Gladstone, guys who played by using the finger as well as the wrist and the arm. They have a certain technique, and I can kind of just go over that slightly with you now, because so many students ask me about it. Would you mind explaining a little bit about your technique? Well, Murray We tried to put this in a book form, but Murray said it won't work because you would wind up with a lot of words and the student would be confused, and you have to have somebody there to kind of show them this is how you do it with the left hand, this is what you do with the right hand. So with the wonderful invention of the videos, it looks like this year, he's 89 years old, looks like this year, he said, I'll do all the narrating and Lou, you do all the playing. I said, thanks a lot. But he could still play if he wanted to, but I think that way you get a chance to see what his method was. That's only one method. I'm not saying that's the only method, but that's the only guys I know that use that to a certain degree were Joe Morello and Buddy Rich, especially those two guys. And what it is, I'll explain a little bit by going over this snare drum. Basically, the position here in the left hand is a normal position, except this finger. Don't worry about it. This one, right? Yeah. Get dropped all the time. Let's stay this way. The idea in the left hand is this finger looped over the stick. That's the means of direction. Like this finger here is in the right hand. We know the fulcrum is here, and this finger is the guiding of the motion. Over here, the fulcrum is here, and this finger does the work. Now, I'll play a single roll in the open and closed note position, and also a long roll, so you get the idea of what this technique is here. So you And that don't work, because we all know, we're players enough to know that when you have a 4-bar break, that's your time for invention. And that's that whip, you know, there's no way that you got time to think about what you're going to play, the perfect coordination when you think and play at the same time. And you do it right on the spot, and that's what you do. But in order to get our hands and feet together, we have to have some starting point, and this is where it all happens, you know. To transfer this over on the drum set is so very important, you know. And I respect a lot of the guys today. I always pinpoint Steve Gadd because, you know, this guy goes into studios, maybe 3 studios in one day, and you never know what you're in for. You don't know whether the artist, what they want, or the producer wants, you know. I tell a wonderful story about a producer came in on one of our record days. He wanted to know why we couldn't play that thing on his slower. So, try to figure that one out sometime. So, you have to worry about producers too. Especially when you tell that great story about this guy that wears a cowboy hat and he's got a girl-handled guns, and his claim to fame was that he spotted some young girl in the club, and he recorded her, and they sold 5 million records. So they think he's a genius. So he knows nothing about music. So he had Larry London come into a room, and he ordered a big urn of coffee. I think it's enough coffee for a year. And he said, "Now, Larry, I want you to sit down at the drums, and I want you to play. And I don't know what kind of beat I'm looking for, but you keep playing, and if I hear that beat, I'll stop it." Well, Larry was close to 300 pounds, right? He played for 3 hours and 47 minutes. After that, he weighed about 200 pounds. And so the only clue he could give me, he said, "The only clue I can give you is it got to sound like a 3-legged dog." After 3 hours and 47 minutes, this was a beat. See the missing leg in there? That's what he had to do, you know. On top of that, he told him, "I don't want to hear any iron." So Larry said, "I beg your pardon." He said, "I don't want to hear any iron." He called me iron. So just a word of caution. Not only do you have to be a great player today, but you have to worry about all this other stuff, you know. And, like Steve Gadd told me once that he went in to do a record date, and the producer said, "Glad to have you, Steve. I want you to sound like Billy Cobham today." So Steve said, "Why didn't you hire Billy Cobham?" He said, "No, I want Steve Gadd. I want you to play like Billy Cobham." So, makes a lot of sense. But you just got to learn how to go straight ahead. Some of the things you have to worry about. This one of the nice things about transferring this kind of playing over in the set. I used Steve as a drummer because the record that he did 50 Ways quite a few years ago with Paul Simon, that was a very interesting record because I immediately got a reaction from all the students by saying, "What did he play on that record?" And I could hear what he did on the drum set, but I didn't know exactly what the fingering was, going from the snare drum to the tom-tom to the hi-hat, whatever. So I went to him personally, and it was interesting because what he played was basically a little march beat. What he did, transferring that over Duke wanted to hear a sort of like an offbeat triplet feel where you do this. So I immediately thought about one of the rudiments, which is the old flat accent, or the Swiss rudiment. Instead of playing the flam on the beat, I put the flam on the third beat. So I did this. Do that. Gene did a lot of single sticking, you know. If they were triplets, I know he did. Those are the kind of things he did, because he
schools.
Huh?
Schools, yeah.
Well, you know, Dizzy carried one of these cymbals with him for a long time. I think the cymbal originally belonged to either Dorsey or Big Sid. I don't know what happened to it, but it was just one that he liked. And you had to play that cymbal a certain way to get the ultimate sound out of it. That's what he really meant. There's a great story about Joe Jones. Mel Lewis called me once to, we were all in New York, so we all met at the at Frank Eppolito's drum shop. So when I walked in, there were like 15 little teeny kids, you know, and they had the sticks, and they were way up. I mean, you're talking about war, man. It was brrr, bang, bang, bang. And so Mel said, come on into the office because you won't be able to hear anything if you stay out there for about 10 minutes. So in comes Joe Jones. And Joe looks at all these little kids bashing away at everything they could see. And he got right in the middle of them, and he said, stop. And all these kids said, who is he? And so he immediately reached in his pocket and got a hold of one of those old brushes with a red knob on the end of it. And all the brushes looked like some dog had been chewing on it. And he just picked up the brush, and he got on one cymbal, and he went, bing, bing, boom, bing, boom, bing, dum, boom, bing, bum, 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 bing, dum, bum. He said, that's where it's at. And he walked away. this big, and the sticks were this small. every night when they came on, before the guy would say to George Kawaguchi, buddy would hold on to me and I'd hold on to him. And I don't know what this guy did, but he did the rim shot, and all the paint from the walls would come out. He named it Store. Every night he'd grab a hold on it. Are you ready? Yep. Here he is, George Kawaguchi. We found out that he was a kamikaze pilot during the war. He's a raw fish, raw meat. So Buddy said, "Wow, that's where we're from." But he was a beautiful guy, wonderful. He was a loud player, but a good player, but just raw bone, just strength. And I couldn't figure that out. Little tiny feet and little hands, the sticks looked like they were like these great big Promark sticks you buy. But we had a lot of fun on that trip. It was working with Buddy was a lot of fun because you played at the top level with him, and 4s and 8s. I mean, if he knew you could come up near it, he'd smother you with another 4 bars or 8 bars. And when we went over on that trip, he didn't have his drums, but I had mine on the plane. And Buddy asked me, "Did you have your drum set?" I said, "Yeah." And he forgot that during January they celebrate New Year's for about 2 weeks, so the Rogers factory was closed. So he had to use a drum set by Hideo Shiraki. And unfortunately, Shiraki was not well. And his drum set with the drum heads were all chewed up, and the beater on the bass drum was cork, and it was chewed up, And so Buddy played on that first concert. So what I used to do was stand out by the wings and look at Buddy and look at him and say, "I can't hear you." And he would look at me and go, this poster that Gene came out with the sousaphone, remember? You see that poster? When that came out, I sent him a telegram and I said, "You finally found the right instrument to play." And he immediately came back with something else with me. It was a lot of fun. The drummers have a mutual respect for one another, really. That's why in the article, that last article in the Modern Drummer, I turned it down because I didn't know what to talk about. I didn't want to talk about myself. We had gone through that so much, And finally, Rick Manning said, "Well, take a day and figure out something." So then I thought of the idea then and now. You have to know where you came from in order to go someplace. And it's good to know that there was a guy like Chick Webb, Baby Dodds, Joe Jones, Big Sid, because if it wasn't for those guys, you wouldn't be around. So it's good for the players to know where you came from and what's happening today. Then you cover the spectrum. Because that's what these guys did. They learned all that themselves, and they passed all that information on to somebody else. And so you got to keep that kind of thing going. In order to become, you have to be, So then and now is so important. And you got so you're writing thesis at school on that subject. Like if you were a trombone player, you start with Kid Ory, and you come up to J.J. Johnson. That way you know where the roots are. It's so important to really know that. That's why I got such a great delight talking about all the great drummers and all the guys that did that up to the present day players. Yes.
What experiences did you maybe have with Roy Knapp or Gene Krupa, actually?
Well, with Roy Knapp, that was my teacher. But I would take the train up from Moline, and instead of going to Kimball Hall, I would go to the bar about 2 blocks away and sober him up so I could take my lesson. And that's true. But Roy was a beautiful guy. He had a drinking problem, but I remember a few years ago, we were on our way to DeKalb. He wanted to go to that school to check things out. It just so happened that Ed Soap was giving a clinic that day. And I told Roy, I he showed me how to play maracas and claves at the same time, and or how to put my feet into two tambourines and play like the two bass drum I did with two tambourines. You know, these guys had all that stuff. They learned to do all that by playing for silent movies, playing as a kid. You know. Roy was a master musician. Gene studied with Roy. Of course, Gene got into a lot of drumming and so forth because Gene was an unschooled drummer. What he learned, was things that he learned from Baby Dolls. Hey, is that Derek up there? You know, ladies and gentlemen, I got to announce this guy because he's one of the greatest piano players. I had a chance to play with him in my band all the time. Derek Smith from London. Gene was self-taught. He told me that most of the things he learned was from Baby Dolls. And Baby Dolls, when Baby Dolls played, when those guys played, they didn't have a hi-hat. And they played a lot of press rolls on the snare drum. And Gene did a lot of those. If you listen to a lot of the early recordings of Benny Goodman, instead of Gene playing a tune like, or a rhythm like this, Benny or Tommy Dorsey, those guys would give you like 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, you know, that's nothing. You know, you got to have a good rhythm section to grab hold of that and say, let's find a groove and go from there. You know, whereas with Basie and Ellington, the first 3 courses was rhythm section. So by the time the band came in, they knew where the tempo was. See what I mean? They were rhythm section players. They didn't give you 1, 2, 1, 2. Like if you have to play a fast tempo and the band even goes 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Gee, give me a break. You know, where is the time? You know, so you have to just grab a hold of that and find the groove. You know, but with those bands, especially with Duke and Basie, they played 2 or 3 courses, and the rhythm section settled down to a groove. When the band came in, straight ahead. That was the great thing about working with both those guys. You know. I remember Tommy Dorsey's downbeat once for the band who did a television show. Here was his downbeat. If you watch me close, here was the downbeat. A wink of an eye. You just want to see if they're paying attention. But I mean, that, you know, that's kind of ridiculous, but that's what you do. But it was always a joy with Duke and Basie because they were swing bands. Benny, Charlie Barnett, those 2 bands were swing bands too. Some of the other bands, they were a nice band, but they weren't swing bands. You know, like Glenn Miller had a nice band, but it wasn't a swing band. It was probably the biggest money maker of all time. But the swing bands were Basie, Ellington, Benny, Charlie Barnett had a good band. Boyd Rayburn had a good band. But you talk about the real authentic good swing bands, there were just a few of them. And that's why Duke and Basie were so great because they did just that, you know. At least you had a fighting chance with the rhythm section to find the groove before the band came in. Once the band came in, that was it. That was the exceptional thing about working with especially those 2 bands. Yes?
A few years ago, finally last year, there was a little kid that was on the night shift. So that he had gone over and he would talk with him, he was 7-year-old. I don't know if you remember him or not. I was just curious.
Oh, yeah.
What you're doing for work.
Oh, that's a young kid, Jacob Armstrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad told me a long time ago, never get on a stage with a kid in a dog act. For some reason, they told me he was that kid, you know. He's wonderful. He's really talented. He doesn't read yet. He doesn't know the basis yet of the swing band, but he'll learn, you know. He plays with his father on Fridays and Saturdays in Pasadena. They play all these Armenian rhythms, and the kid is amazing. He's getting older now. He's 10 years old. Yeah, and but he's a wonderful young man. He plays like, you know, he plays like a 35-year-old guy who's been on the road. You know, he's hip to a lot of things, and for that age, he does remarkably well.
Well, he had mentioned your name on the show, and I was curious if you were.
You mentioned what?
He mentioned your name on the show. And I was curious if there's any follow-up.
Yeah, but if they let him alone and let him grow and let him learn this instrument, he's going to be a heck of a player because he's got the natural ability. You know, he listens, and first of all, he's so little. You know, I don't know how he reaches the pedal. You know, and but he listens to what you have to say, and he's willing to learn, and that's a good barometer there. Yeah.
Just kind of wondering, how did you approach coordinating your left and left half with your right half, mission campaigns and stuff like that? How did you approach teaching yourself coordination working with the right half from your face over the left foot?
How did I coordinate that?
Yeah.
Just from playing. I think that's the best way. Yeah, I did some practicing, individual practicing, but I experimented right on the gig. And that's when you really develop the power or the ability to play the dynamics and really get acquainted with this instrument. When you play, that's why road bands are so great. They get 5 hours of every night. When you do that, you feel like you own the instrument. You know? That's how I did. That's how I did mine.
Pretty much put it all together right down there while you're playing.
You mean practicing?
Yeah, you just had to put things together, experiment in life.
Yeah, I did that. What I did in the early stages was to set a metronome at a certain speed and then play quarter notes, eighth notes, triplets, and 16th notes, and see what kind of escalation I could get on those singers are different. Every one of them has a different conception. When I worked with Mel Torme, he rehearses every single note. He's a very meticulous, you know, and that's fine, that's great. But when he writes his own arrangements, he puts a lot of notes in it. So you've got to really, the rhythm section has to kind of really settle down to find a groove, you know. We just finished working with Ella, and Ella will always let you know by one of her hands, and she'll pop her fingers, whether it's really a little too fast or a little too slow. See, every one of those singers have a different conception. My dear wife had, you see, first of all, when I play, I make a lot of sounds when I play. And when we first got married, like she used to be singing 3 feet in front, and one time she stopped the band and said, "He is singing louder than I am." But when you played with Earl, a ballad to her was this tempo. She never got it slower. When you play with Ella and Sarah, a ballad is that slow. You know, and so every one of those singers had a different conception of where the time was. They were there. Sinatra was another guy that he liked to hear a heavy backbeat, you know, and he stayed right on the beat, maybe a little bit ahead of it, a little bit, you know. And you had to know that by just watching them when you played for them, you know. And also on Jazz at Philharmonic, I had to, you know, all those guys knew that I was kind of a halfway decent guy, so they could come to me and say, "Hey Lou, use this cymbal for me. Hey Lou, use this cymbal." Now with Dizzy, he liked this cymbal, Chinese cymbal. James Moody and Lester Young. Lester Young was funny because he called everybody lady. Lady Krupa, Lady Rich. He walked up to me the first time I met him and said, "Lady Bellson, when you play for me, just play titty bum, and don't drop no bombs." With James Moody, don't play this. No click on it. You want a this. Syncopate with the left hand. So all those guys had a different thing. With Oscar, he had to play an 18-inch cymbal with 3 rivets in it, and Milt Jackson. So that's what they wanted to do. He had a cymbal with 3 rivets in it. You know, keep them happy. But it was a joy to be able to play with those guys and to supply them with what they wanted, you know. With Dizzy, I didn't, you know, especially if you had a guy like Ray Brown, I didn't play. Just drop some bombs, which I didn't do for Lester Young. But that was the joy about working for those guys. It was really a test to be able to play for each one of them and then go for yourself, you know. They didn't tell you how to play. They just said, "Use that for me and then go for yourself after that." Yeah.
How do you go about deciding whether to play straight quarters on the bass drum in a swing tune or whether you're going to use it in
Well, yeah, that's a good point. If you're playing, see, we learned to play, when I was a kid, you learned to play 4 beats on the bass drum because that's what it was. It was a hard swing. You know, we hadn't gotten into bebop yet. So if the drummers played 4 beats on the bar, you know, I saw Joe Jones do it, but you did it so that you didn't overshadow the bass. You didn't do this. You might as well put the strap on and march down the street. You know? Guitar player, that's like a piano player like Derek and a bass player like Ray Brown and a groovy drummer like Joe Jones and a guitar player going vroom, 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 vroom. You know, I've seen a couple of those too. And it just ties you nuts. You can't move it. Because Freddie Green played, he did this. See that motion? Instead of this, he did this. So like that motion, see? Which a lot of kids don't know about that because they play a different style, but they don't know about this one, see? And in the rhythm section, that means so much if you got a guitar player. Because he can ruin the whole rhythm section. Or a piano player that goes, he'll ruin the rhythm section played more on a bass drum, and he was playing a tempo like that. Drums